Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Hospitality Marketing live show number 415, being brought to you from the cool and peaceful places of Florida. Wow, heat is everywhere, isn't it? And for those that aren't dealing with heat, they're dealing with air quality and it's lots of other stuff. It has been the summer of weather. We talked about that a little bit last week in our live show as to how weather is impacting demand and cycle and how to adjust for it based on basically people's demand and interest that we're using in tracking. But that is not to this week's discussion. Yes, I'm in my Johnny Cash outfit. I was going to sing a Johnny Cash song, but I will not put you through that. But yes, I'm wearing a black shirt on a hot day, thankfully, blissfully in air conditioning. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us live. If you're watching us on our TV station, thank you for doing so, which might be on Roku, Google, Amazon, Apple, Samsung, the list goes on. If you're watching us simulcasted on Facebook on a dozen or so pages that we are broadcasting on, thank you so much for that. YouTube channels, lots of those. Twitter, Twitch, but only one on LinkedIn, which is my actual profile. So anyways, with that in mind, let's get to today's topic. Today's topic is the correct way to gather data, the 5 Qs. Now, it may seem like Captain Obvious to this, but this actually is born a little bit out of frustration. So if you brought your axe today, let's join the wedding wheel over here and let's grind down a little bit of the axe. I see from a variety of vendors to a variety of clients that I have the privilege of working with, a variety of reports. I don't know if I can use the word variety any more than I already have, but I'll try to. That don't really address what the report is supposed to be valuable for. I see these reports as really glamorized PowerPoint deck slides of what the perceived value of the purchase of the relationship with the vendor is. What do I mean by this? Well, I think you have all gotten these types of reports. They have beautiful graphics, nice fonts, pretty much standard in their deck presentation. Your logo, their logo, nice little pictures of your property, so forth. And then some very stylized, ground down to the point of vanilla statistics as to what they're doing. Now, for those of you that have heard me rant about this before and statistics and so forth, statistics are in the eye of the presenter. Any number can be created or interpreted to the benefit of the person that's sharing it. And if it's a number that can't be worked to their benefit, it's just not added into the presentation. These reports do a lot of that. They talk about what looks like good performance, but they don't use metrics that it's measured against, a benchmark that's measured against it to actually say, is this better? Does this make it look like the work that we're asking this client, this vendor to do is being done? They're selective in what choices they point to. They're selective in their metrics that they're picking. And if you're not fast enough with it or attentive enough to it, you may find that your month-to-month reports literally change depending upon which metric represents the vendor the best. Catch that all the time, where it's like, wait, you guys were referring to click-through rate last month, but this month you're only talking about cost to click. What happened? And these variations are because, again, to the rule of statistics, it is in the eye of the presenter. 75% of all statistics that are used are made up on the spot, if you know what I mean. So with that, I see these reports nicely glamorized, using the fonts and the colors of your brand. And again, I said to the images that are used, so you feel attached to it. Anybody that has pictures. I mean, we often complain about pictures for owners where they always want a picture of their porta cachet as if it's the most important picture in the world when it's the least important to the people that are coming to your hotel. But when you see pictures of yourself, you get distracted and you focus on those things. Like, oh wow, that's our spa, that's our fireplace, that's our lobby, that's our rooms, whatever. And you take warmly to the content that's surrounding them because you have already created an affinity for them. It's psychology. It's what happens. It's why people do these things. But is the data useful? And we're going to go through the 5 Qs in just a minute. But the idea is that they point out some highlights. Oh, click-through rate is up 147%. How can it be so much? Did we miss the boat the month before? Or was the world so different in the month that you're telling me the report for that we just got caught flat-footed getting an overabundance of demand that you didn't come to me and say, we need to spend more money because there's too many people tracking our inventory and we don't have enough advertising to get in front of the whole audience. That's what always bugs me about these super large inflated ROI reports and so forth. You got a 180 to 1 return. Aren't we just amazing? That means to me, from the world of my real KPI, which is gross revenue, top line revenue, feeding the funnel, okay, is we had such an abundance of demand that what we were exposing ourselves to is to the voice of what we're out there for. We had way more people wanting to have what we had than we actually presented ourselves in front of. We had a huge injustice. Let me explain the numbers as that works. 100,000 people are the full audience for what you're targeting for. And I say that from the ideas of your keywords, your promotions, your demand to market, what have you. It's called total impression count. And you budgeted that from the monies you allocated for paid campaigns and to this medium, that you went over and only got a 10% share of voice. Now, there's always variations to this in the sense that in some markets, that's absolutely stunningly amazing. Picture New York, that you got 10% of the voice associated with a particular product type. But in most general senses, that's a willfully low amount. And your vendor is saying you got 150 to 1 return for us getting out to the market, meaning they spent your money. From the money that they spent with you, they said that it returned that much more in return to you. Okay. Now, that means that of your 10% voice, you probably could have gone to 20% voice. What would that have done? Would that have just doubled your potential revenue? No, it would have actually five-folded your revenue, increased more, because it's a geometric growth, not just a doubling up growth. So I would much rather run at a 10 to 1 and have a 40% share of the voice than 150 or 15 to 1, okay, and have 10% of the voice, because that meant that there was more money to yield for that channel. You know what should have happened from that? The vendor should have approached you way early on when that was happening and said, guys, we're riding a wave here. There is a huge demand to your market. If they were a better vendor, they would have known that this demand would have been coming for this month, because they were looking at the numbers for the traffic prior to the month and saying, we're getting a lot of searches compared to year over year, compared to average weighted mean over the past few years, because we have so many variations these past few years. We've had those discussions on the show. And we really need to get in front of you and say, hey, look, I know you only budgeted $5,000 for us to do paid campaigns, but we're seeing very early on pace. And our budget is limiting our ability to get in front of all the people that are looking for us right now. We really need to either take the money you're giving us and say, to prove our point, we're going to open up the funnel to our budgeting for the first week. And if our budget is really burning through and creating the conversions, not just the volume of interest, but actually is translating the traffic that it's getting in front of into actual conversions, which is a monitoring process, then you now have the justification to give us even more money, because this is going to feed a larger volume of top line revenue. Now, if that goal is never really defined to your vendor, shame on you. They should ask for it, but in all honesty, you should also know that this is the metric that you're holding them to, and that is total contribution of what they're doing. If you go over and some vendor comes to you and says, hey, we got a 20 to 1 return. Here's your $50,000 for what you gave us. It's great. I needed $500,000, or I needed a 20% contribution of this channel compared to the 5% contribution that this represents. Those are the clarities of conversations of defining KPIs to your vendor so that they know what they're shooting for, which makes the dialogue of them coming back and asking for money because the demand to your market is proving it can be valuable a lot easier than a very elongated, say a vendor is proactive and a week into the month, they're seeing this trend and they go over and reach out to their contact at your property or your business. And they share this revelation that you are having a huge demand to market, just like they said maybe the month before. Maybe they're a really good vendor and they told you this was coming and that we should be prepared for it. We should look at expanding our budgets and so forth. And they tried to go as much I told you so as they could. And in the first week, it's validating everything they told you. If you don't have the infrastructure to handle that type of dialogue, they go to their contact person. The contact person isn't the person of authority usually that can designate increases in budgets. They have the same constrictions that everybody else has. Hey, I have a budget line. I can't go over it, which is, we've had those discussions of how that doesn't work well. So then they have to go to their superior and say, hey, our paid search vendor is telling us this. They told us this was a potential. It's proving to be true. And they're saying they really want to allocate more budget. What usually happens is, well, what are we going to get for that? The typical three questions: what are we going to get for it? How much is it going to cost us? And who else is doing it? The kind of mentality. Or they might go over and say, well, can you give me some information that validates why you're asking for money? And maybe the vendor is really that good and they went over and already provided that data showing here's our pace, here's our spend, here's how we opened up the budget and how it showed that it was still very fertile ground, that the percentage of voice that we got for all the demand to the market is generating that revenue we're looking for. Maybe they have all that and they already gave it to their client, their client rep. And the client rep brings that back to the decision maker. And the decision maker goes, and depends upon how your internal culture is, say, well, we don't have the money budgeted for that. If you're in that constraint in your organization, you're literally closing your door while customers are knocking on it to come in and buy your product. I'm sorry, we only have so much money for the electric bill and we have to turn it off at 5 p.m. because we don't want to spend more money that, even though we could probably make a 10 ton more money by opening the door and letting you buy our product. That's what that kind of decision makes. But say, for instance, being all positive today, that the organization realizes they have the opportunity to drive more revenue through the channel. Here's where the caveats of discussion come. Well, if it doesn't, who's going to blame? Who's going to stick their neck out? Is it the guy that makes the decision to spend more money? That is he at risk politically, internally in the organization? That, maybe this decision will put him in jeopardy if it doesn't come through at the level they want. Now he has to answer for the fact he blew a line budget item for a hunch that it was going to be a better production. Again, the culture of the business warrants whether or not that's a acceptable risk or a risky decision to make. But either which way, it usually takes a few days in the dialogue of the back and forth between vendor and client, client and client, client internally back to the vendor, vendor back to the client for the final decisions, that maybe that demand cycle got lost. Maybe by the time they actually convoke some changes, that the real true positive impact that everybody was basing the decision on doesn't come through. And now there's the jeopardy of who's holding the bag of poop at the end, that what you said was the reason for us to do this budget busting decision didn't come at the levels that you promised us, how that word got thrown in, at the levels that were promised us to make the decision to allow it. This is where reporting comes in. See, you knew I wasn't just going to complain about this as I was going to give you a solution for this. This is where good reporting comes in. That's dynamic and persistent, not forensic and historical. And what I mean by forensic is literally post-mortem kind of look. What did we do? How did it do this? And then I'm staring at a report from another vendor to a client of mine about their performance and metrics associated with what they've done for them for their paid campaigns. And this is why I'm drawing upon the information that is not useful. Nice pictures, nice colors, nice graphic, nice fonts. Everything matches what they want. They got their logo and their client's logo story. And then they have all these those spaghetti lines as to trends of where the top keywords landed and where the medium keywords landed and how many of those are. And then it shows it all the way back, 2 years. So that actually softens the fact that for the past 1, 2, 3, 4 months, according to this very granular chart, they've actually been low and then trending on a plateau. So obviously, if they took just last month's numbers, they look like a straight line from what this looks like. So they had to stretch out the graph to show that it's actually like a stock market, higher than you were getting 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. Wow. That's the power of statistics. Let's make a number to make it look like everything's okay. When in fact, if I look close enough and have to really zoom down on it, they started with a pretty heavy dip first quarter this year, came up, spring break it looks like, and then kind of at plateau and actually slightly sloping downwards as to their organic keyword placements, which I guess is a positive number they like referring to. And in this case, they have to really stylize it out a little bit to make sure that the number doesn't look bad. Like, why is this thing going down? Why is the arrow going down? Why are we not going up every day? They did it by expanding the chart to make it look like, hey, everything's fine. Look, it's higher than way back over here, whenever that was. What's use of that? And just to grind an axe on this one, what does this do? Is it a affirmation for the vendor? Like, hey, you're doing a good job. Pat you on the head. Here's a cookie. Here's a report that says you're doing good for us. No. Does it say, what should we do about it? No, because there's nothing really to say what to do about it. I don't know what the reference is. The fact that there's X hundreds of keywords in the top 3 for June compared to, a year ago, there was lesser. So They got more words in the top 3 positions for them year over year. What does that mean? I mean, at the end of the day, the person is looking at this to validate whether or not we keep them as a vendor. What are they supposed to do with this? That it's okay to keep sending checks to them every month when they get a bill? Or is this an action item? Like, well, should we do something more? Or is it, oh, we don't have to worry about our keywords because they're better than they were last year? Where does that land from? And even if it was a particular project, if say it is a KPI that last year in the discussion with the vendor, they decided they wanted to expand their top keyword presence, they wanted to expand how many keywords they were showing up for. What does that translate to? In the sense of does that generate the dollars? Did it generate the dollars? What impact did it have? Was it just a feel good number that we were able to expand our number top 10 keywords? Or was it a really strategic play because by doing that, it created a number correlation to another piece of data that said, because we expanded our keywords from X to Y, we have been able to improve our conversions or our audience growth to X or our ability to generate revenue over here incrementally more. Where's the connect the dots to this program? That's when the reports begin to become a little bit more useful, even if they are forensic like this. Then there's some schedule information like, hey, we've been so good. We asked you for data by this date and we updated the content and this and this. That's an affirmation. This is just affirmation that, pat us on the head. We're doing what we said, which is every month we're improving something or adding content to something, which goes back to the keyword discovery stuff. I'll be honest with you, improving and expanding content and being progressive. And this is a positive in the sense that they're actively every month adding additional content to what they're doing is a progressively positive thing. So often, so many clients say they just spent the money for a website. It's out of the budget for next year because we paid for it last year, and they let it sit and rot. And then eventually, after a couple of years, they start complaining about a website that isn't performing. And all they remember is it seems like yesterday they made a new website when in fact it's been a few years. They haven't continued to invest in its content creation, content development, refinement, SEO optimization, all the ditch digging, unpopular but necessary things to do. And now the website isn't performing well. And now they start blaming, well, you guys are the ones that sold us on this new website. Why is this not doing all the stuff we're doing? Because it's 3 or 2 years old. You've not given us any opportunity to expand what's on it. And therefore, it's diminishing in its value performance because your competitors are making new websites or have made new websites or continue to add to their websites. These have to be candid discussions between client and vendor. If vendor is being held accountable, the client needs to be held accountable as well and understand what the commitment is of doing things like this. So maybe this report about how the content is being continually added each month is a way of opening that dialogue. I would like to positively think so, that it has that potential. Then there's other numbers that are just cute little green blocks that say we spent this, we got these many impressions. Oh my God, is that one of the most useless numbers in the world? Truly, genuinely, it's a vanity number that no longer has relevance, except for in context to your segmentation of the traffic on your website based in the cumulative amount of people that may have been exposed to your website. And even then, it's a stretch because if you just simply take out bounce rate, the people that don't stay on your site because simply it's not the site that they need or want or get to for whatever reason they didn't want to, whatever it is, didn't see what they wanted, bad navigation, bad content, bad linkage, whatever list of stuff we can point out to, that's all included into your hobnob of impressions. If you just cut out bounce rate, that number gets cut down, 30, 40% optimistically. Pessimistically, it could be even higher depending upon numbers and product and how well your website's performing. So cut that bad boy in half, and now you're down to a few 100,000 impressions. Great. Now that's the number. The people that actually came to your website and navigated on your website, not the ones that bounced. Take that number right off. So impressions, what? Okay. That's like a click counter from 25 years ago. Then that number has some relevance because then you're looking at the entire context of those people that engaged with your website. What was their engagement levels, the duration, the number of pages? Those are still vanity metrics, but at least they're useful vanity metrics in the fact that they can be used to interpret the value of the content and its driving force to continue the engagement process, time on site, so forth. They're usable, but there's even more usable. And that's where we're going to get to the 5 Qs in just a minute. Then it talks to about, again, general impressions, numbers that make them feel good that they're doing something that have no actionable value other than the context of, so this is how many people everything we're doing is getting in front of. Doesn't mean that there's anything valuable about that. It just means these are the people for any variety of circumstances, reasons, our efforts or not, which they don't put into the fine print, is seeing your product. But we're going to take credit for that number because we're using it in our nice little charts, and on and on. Again, I'm grinding axes on a whetstone today, so there you go. That's my grinding of that particular part. I want to talk about the real topic value of today, which is the correct way to gather data. I've just taken, what did I take? Oh my gosh, 20 minutes of describing what bad data and bad reporting is. Let's mend the fence and talk about the correct ways to gather data. And the reason why I brought this topic today up is that we're into the latter part of June. We're getting that way. Next month begins the long slog of budget season. Next month is usually the month of gathering, which is my way of saying this is the time you get your dust off your old numbers, look at your historicals, start gathering your information that you're going to begin to use to be a base template, your projections of what you think you need. This is the time, the dangerous time, that ownership and management teams get together and decide what their growth requirements are financially. And from that, they put the carrot on the stick for everybody to go chase after, that everybody's then responsible for finding mystical ways to hit that number that is artificially created. And it is artificially created, because forecast modeling, I've yet to come across a client that does proper modeling. What is modeling? Modeling is the mathematical analysis of trends, pace, and data associated with the anticipation of interpretation of the data for growth or diminishment based on the principles of historical patterns, again, trend, and pace, so that the modeling is based on realistic expectations rather than artificial assignments of what they need to do. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have a goal that we should always shoot for. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be aspirations as to what we think we can develop. If you're simply settling for what you think you could do based on what you've done, that's not a goal. So please understand, I'm not saying that is the better way of doing things. But proper modeling gives you benchmarks. Proper modeling says, this is what we should expect. So if we're looking to create anything beyond our benchmark of expectation, what uniquely variant things do we have to do to create that increase compared to what we consider to be what we're going to get anyway? That's the value of modeling. That's the baseline of saying, here's what we got, and going forward. From your departmental requirements of marketing or revenues or sales is to determine, sales is a good example. What's our return business? What is coming into next year that we have the opportunity from citywides and or other increased events, or now having had events that have now another annual renewal to it, like the first annual happened this year, so there's a second one next year. Knowing the impact historical for that, what's our expectations for next year? What did we actually get from this year that we can think that we can do better on getting more of next year? That's what this next month is about, and that requires data. I can honestly tell you the glitzy, very nice looking PowerPoint deck of reporting from the vendor that I was just rambling about in my mental exercise with you is not the source of that data. The data you need is more dynamic. The data you need is more engaging. The data you need has more granularity to it. And I'm now speaking directly to the marketers. Revenue management should ask proper questions. And it's not about occupancy, length of stays, booking windows, and historical patterns of source of business. This is what, going to the marketing, is are you seeing that will tell me where I can target more business and generate more rate opportunities and or offer packages and or ways of getting more of business from demographics, geographies, and so forth. So let's go through the 5 Qs related to proper gathering of data. When I say the 5 Qs, this isn't rocket scientist, but this is an applicability of the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So who are my guests? Can you answer that question? Who are your guests? Now, the correct answer is it changes all the time. Your guests are not one entity. Your guests aren't just one demographic. Even if you were to assign a value proposition to your brand, that your brand was created for a demographic type, okay? There is variations as to that type and other interests from other types of people on simplicities of seasonality, event-driven, holiday-driven. These things change the dynamics of who will walk in your door. You might be that trendy Euro chic, a hotel that has cute meat slicers in your breakfast thing, and you have breakfasts that families from the US go, "Where's the waffles?" Um, but you're still gonna get those families that walk in and go, "Where's the waffles?" 'Cause your location is prime, your rate is prime, your convenience, whatever is prime, the redemption points are prime, whatever. You're gonna get those other people in. Is there a value proposition to cultivating that relationship at times when you're hipster, traveling nomad demographic isn't as in high demand for you? Can you fill it with other demand type cycles? So, who are your guests? Do you have a means of finding that data? And if so, what is it? We'll talk about that. Next question. What is getting sold? Can you answer that? I mean, honestly, as a management or ownership group, do you know what your best selling product is at any one time? What's persistently your best selling product? Good question to ask, right? Now, sure, you have other large save the world decisions you have to make, but in your role, people in their roles look up to you as to knowing the context of what they do for you. That is the role of management. Okay. Leadership. I wouldn't say management. Management and leadership are two different things. A leader's role is to be that person that appreciates and understands the perspective and the requests and the demands to their team so that they have the answers and the perspective of what they're asking of them to do. And that comes from knowing what they're selling. What is getting sold? How do you find that out? What do you do with it? We'll get to the where you find that out part. Where am I selling it? Okay, so the first two questions through. Third question, where am I selling it? What channels? What are your channels of contribution? What are the value of those channels? What is the cost of those channels? Why are those channels being used by the people that you're selling to? And why are those channels being used for the product that they're purchasing? It's a correlation. They're not all silos. The who, the what, and the wheres aren't separate silos. They're intertwined with a whole answer combination between all three of them. Okay, but where you're selling it, you should understand your channels of demand, your channels of cost, and what's being produced from all of those, and what's the value of those channels and their conversion values to know what your channel costs are, to know whether or not you invest heavier into your lower cost channels, or whether it's just beating a bush that you've had voice saturation and that you can't yield more from it for the money you're spending to it, because even more money into it isn't going to give you the return from that money that you need. So you have to look at other channels that may be more costly, but there's a huge or larger opportunity of growth in those channels that is realized. Those are strategies that are at your level of decision making, or the people that you have thinking about those things level of decision making with your endorsement. So the where am I selling it is a critical component. The next is, when is all this happening? Now, you can refer to it the way revenue managers do as to, well, this is my booking window. Marketers know that the booking window is only at the very end of everything else that happened before it. Literally, that booking window is the prime of everything that has been accumulating them to herd them into that spot that these things happen. Their whole discovery, education funnel, for simplicity conversations, has driven these people to the point where they're at that booking window. So don't look at it in just those terms. When is this happening is months in the making, weeks in the making, if not at least. Where did the interest initially come from? Where did the interest come to? What did they find from? Else did they look to? What other combinations? In other words, attribution. How does all that put together? So that's the when is this happening? Why is it happening? That's a hard question, because sometimes you're now inferring based on your personas and the drivers as to why people purchase the way they do, when they do, for what they do. The why is challenging, because the why means that you have to pre-qualify how you're looking at your guests. The why is really much more connected to the who than most of the others. Not that it's not connected to the others, but the who and the why are very, very tightly connected, because to answer the why, you need to know the who more than anything. Why people are buying, how they're buying, and what they're buying is related to you identifying what you think are the driving factors. We've talked at length on this show about budgets for travelers, for transient travel. Summertime travel has been the most recent conversation to that. We've talked about corporate motivations, corporate costs, corporate travel, the radiance associated with it. We talked about the modalities of finances related to people's purchase decisions, their preference of what they're looking to do, destination modeling versus transient modeling, of an interim stay versus a destination stay. We've talked about these variations as to why they purchase what they do. Very few people, just to put it in a very simplistic way, stay at a full featured resort because they're between point A and point C, unless they plan on spending enough duration of time that being at your resort validates their interim stop with you. If I'm going from point A to point C and your amazing resort is between the two, I'm not going to spend just one night popping in, paying a resort fee I'll never take advantage of, or restaurants I won't go to, or a water park I won't enjoy, or a golf course I won't be able to play, or on and on and on, because I'm just literally laying my head down, getting back up, getting in my car, and continuing to point C. I'm going to stay at a hotel that's more accommodating to that. I just need a place to rest before I go. If I'm going to stay at your resort, it's because I'm going to enjoy your resort and take advantage of what the cost is to be at your resort, unless you're the only place to stay, which is very rare for those things to be actually happening. So the why is related to the purpose of travel. Understanding who your guests are through personas and the development of those personas and the validation of the data that validates that you've picked the right personas changes every month, season, event, because everything drives different personas. The people that attend your hotel or stay at your hotel because of a certain event will be potentially dramatically different than the people staying at your hotel for yet a different event. One might be family, one might not be family, one might be whatever. The idea is that you are constantly in flux as to who is connected to your messaging. So you have to have the correct content and the correct marketing to put that content in front of those people to communicate with them your value proposition. And I know this says, well, why does this have to do about data? This is the data you need. And the last question to talk about is the how. How are we getting all of this information out in front of everyone? How are you taking your content, taking your offers, taking your rates, taking your asset availabilities, your amenity availabilities, and everything about you that makes you valuable, why you built the place that you're running, and how are we getting them in front of them? How are we communicating what we are and what we offer to our potential guests? What are the mediums of that? And what are the best ways of developing and cultivating that? Where is that data coming from? Let's talk about some of the better aspects of data collection. We have talked a lot prior to July 1st and obviously after the first of this month, July 1st, about the transition of Google Universal Analytics to GA4, their fourth edition of their analytics program. We talked about the fact that Google went from, hey, we're not going to support Universal Analytics come July, to earlier this year saying, oh, by the way, and it's also going to go dark. And that whether that's a scare technique to force people, or the big red banner across your analytics on the top that said, hey, this isn't set up for GA4 yet, and this is going to go dead in X days until July 4th, whatever, still didn't get everyone's attention. And we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. The people that didn't do anything, people that did but didn't know what they were doing, and the people that were proactively doing it. I like being in that third category, by the way. All said and done, we're past that hurdle now. And now we're dealing with the fact that either the people that didn't do anything or the people who didn't do enough are facing interruptions in their data, which is going to create some interesting scenarios for people come next month when they start trying to gather all of this data that begins to answer and address their development of their budgets, because they're going to lose year over year data. Now, they might only be at that point losing July year over year data in comparison to what they used to have. And they're only going to have legacy data, but they're not going to be able to compare current pace and traffic and data. And the issue is that, and this is the sad part, is a lot of people looked at the transition as being simply a transition that will produce the same reporting information. And it doesn't. We've gone into some granularities as to the difference between Google Universal Analytics version 3 to what Google Analytics version 4 represents, that there is a session-based formatting associated with the Universal Analytics program, and that there's a data dimensions category associated with GA4. And we also talked about the fact in GA4, there are 3 variations to how data can be used. There is a sessions-based. It's not the same sessions-based. It's based on how it collects data now, but it's basically referencing to whether it's first click versus last click versus attribution distribution, which is your data dimension. So you have session-based data, you have user-based data, and you have data layering data-based data. That doesn't make sense since it's over and over, but it is true. And so for that reason, there's values to each. Some of the easiest transitions is to use GA4 session-based data as a close proximity to the previous session-based data tracking that was done before. So the numbers don't go crazy with some people going, oh my God, how are we going to compare last year over this year when the numbers aren't being based on the same data collection. And that's true. There is issues with that. You need to be able to filter that variations too. But having that data is critically important. Now, a lot of people are going to tell you how you need to use business intelligence. And of course, the buzzword AI is throwing around there all over the place and so forth. We're looking for first step mitigation. First step mitigation is to the data that you need, that you're most familiar with gathering for the most important purpose of what your next month will be about. And that is the aggregation of the data necessary for budgeting creation, as to how and where you're going to define this increase in revenues that are going to be expected of you. And the 5 questions. You need to have data that is functional. Now, realistically, there are 3 categories of organizations or people within organizations in their use of data. Let's take the lower level, the people that have to grind through the stacks of columns, the spaghettis, the pie charts, the bar graphs, to look at mystically and try to understand what the numbers represent. Then you have the interim group of people that benefit from the first group of people looking at this and making some sort of interpretations to that data. That's about where you begin to enter into the vendor report world that we just were badgering about at the beginning of the show. Glossy ways of stylizing the data, highlighting the things that are self-validating, even if, say, for they're a good vendor and they're not doing, they're giving you straight numbers for you to understand, numbers that you and the vendor have agreed to as benchmarks and KPIs. And they're producing it into a viewing perspective. And that's the reports that you see generated all over the place, the multi-page, colorful pies, graphs, straight spaghetti lines, and so forth, showing greens going upwards and spaghettis are this way, and these are the variations, and these are the things, and this is the benchmark numbers of CPCs and spends that we talked about that you wanted to see, and so forth. That's that middle area. Okay. Then you have the third category, the I don't care how the sausage is made as long as I can get to eat the sausage. They need benchmarking. Just, are we at, above, or below what we should be for any of these categories I have? When I get a report that says, hey, you are having a problem, or you're pacing below where you want it to be or above where you want it to be or whatever, that solicits them to talk to the second group, the middle group, as to, why am I getting this notification? Or good or bad? What's the justification of this? Because I want to either brag about it to my peers or I want to complain about it to you and get it fixed. That's proactive reporting. If you do that at the end of the month, that's painful, because that same person is now looking at like, this was terrible. Why didn't we fix this earlier in the month? And everybody else is looking down at the ground in their shoelaces because they don't have the power. You didn't give them the power to make these changes. You said, give me a monthly report, and then now I'm going to come back and beat you over the head with it if it's not a number that I like to be proud of. That's an inherent leadership problem. That is a manager, not a leader. So those people need dynamic, engaging notifications that are preemptively letting them know, based on parameters that are understood, that if it isn't running at a pace that is acceptable, predefined, they're going to get notified sooner rather than later. So they get to ask the second group, hey guys, I'm noticing that we're a little bit behind on our paid campaign production. It looks like either our traffic's down or our CPC is too high or our conversion's too low, whatever the metric is. Is anybody looking at that right now? Is there something already being done about it? And I'm just noticing that we got notified. And at that point, the middle group, who looks at the aggregate way of the data, might have already looked at, well, there's a correlation of that's down because everything's down, or we haven't run the campaign, or the campaigns that we ran expired, or whatever the excuse is, or not excuse, reason. It's a reason. It's not excuse. And then they're the ones that are also going down to the first level people that are looking at the numbers and saying, what exactly is going on? Well, June 25th and June 24th, that weekend didn't produce our forecasted goals for that. Our occupancy was down this much. Our revenue ADR stayed the same. So we basically didn't get the demand to market because our ADR might have been too high. That involves revenue management's discussion into it. But you see how that answer works back and flow. But data has to be used. If you go to your Google Analytics right now, and if you haven't set up proper metrics as to what you're tracking, just thinking that the auto default of what Google did for you because they didn't want people to go dark, you're going to find that there's a lot of data that's missing. A lot of data that you maybe had set up with events and goals that isn't there anymore, because events and goals don't work anymore, not the way they used to anyway. You need other ways of identifying data. Now, going back to our 5 Qs, let's just take some out of the hat to compare what we're talking about. When am I selling it? When is it all happening? Do you have an idea which days of the week are your better days? Online. I mean, we're talking about digital metrics at this point. Do you know which days are your better days? Do you know which days are what time of days you're doing better business? And why is that important? I mean, honestly, is it really important to you that 1 to 3 o'clock on Tuesdays is your best production of online bookings? And even go even farther, what am I selling? And that it's King Studios. Is that important compared to what? To you, maybe not. Maybe just knowing that is enough to be able to ask good questions of your team. But it's more important for the person that needs to act on that data, your marketer. Your marketer needs to know that these are better times, better days, selling better products, and to know why, because they know who's buying them. What's the demographic that's buying them? It's a king room. So we're not talking about families with kids over the age of 7, maybe 9. Okay. If it is even a family, where are they coming from? And is how soon, how those people that are buying on those days, when did they start looking at us? And where did they come through to find us? What was our presentation of communication? Was it paid campaigns? Was it social campaigns? Was it our website just organically? Was it if there's a brand relationship, did it come from brand, whatever? Where did that referral come into? What did they go through in our site to get to the point that they purchased on Tuesday between 1 and 3 at King Studio? And all that 5 questions comes from the data you have. And that comes from building charts that give you that insight, but they're dynamic reporting charts. These aren't ones that are statically PDF'd out that, hey, this is the end of the month, here's your report. This is where you can go in and you can modify drop downs and say, I want to look at these dates in particular. I want to look at these. Did they use mobile for that? Did they use their desktop for that? Did they use tablets for that? What the channel versus the device versus the time of day, so forth. These are questions that help marketing understand not just forensically if they're doing something correct and the validation of their strategy, but also the interpretations of tweaking and modifying and proactively looking at what they need to do forward, aka budgeting. Okay, knowing this data, we can replicate these types of patterns next time. When next time comes up next year, we can say, well, you know what? These people came from this geography. This demography was the ones that did this. And they bought these types of products this far ahead after they looked this long at it. That creates a marketing strategy. And if you look at your channel and you say, well, that channel cost me this much to produce stuff from it, and this was the yield from it, then I know if I spend this much more or as much or less, or shifting money over to this channel instead, then I can expect this type of yield. Now the marketer in data can actually validate what they can do about next year's budget. I feel that July next year or June next year, I can focus on these demographics this far ahead in time in these geographies on these channels, spending this much money with this type of return that historically can be shown as being as viable. And from that, based on what rates we are asking for, mind you, if that pattern's still to those people, that I should expect this type of yield. And that number makes it work for budgeting creation. How do you do all this? Well, again, going back to there's a lot of places I want to show you shiny, glitzy BI tools and use the AI buzzword of like, well, AI is going to help you figure all this stuff. No, AI is a right now, currently version 1, generation 1 is a child. It will tell you whatever you want to hear based on whatever it already knows. It can find out. Doesn't mean that it's true. Doesn't mean it's factual. Doesn't mean it's fact checked. It just will answer your question to answer your question for what it can find. That's it. And so for that reason, it can be helpful. Do not get me wrong. And I talked about this at length on my podcast, and today's podcast will be no exception to this. It's 2 tools that AI can improve upon certain functions and so forth. But it's a mirror tool. It's a validation, verification, interpretation tool that always, always, always goes through human intervention of reality, confirmation, and truth. And from that, this kind of data, the reports, are helpful in a format that the user needs to understand. Level 1 user, not level 1, the first generation of data grinders They want granular data. They need to see the segmentations, variations, and ways to combine it correctly, not the blitzed version. The middle people need a blitzed version because they're aggregating from maybe a variety of sources, variety of properties, and so forth. They need a more aggregate data. I'm not faulting them for the fact that they need aggregated data. I just need to make sure that it's not cotton candy data. And then the third party, the money makers, the money authority, okay, the C levels and so forth, and ownerships and senior management need to understand the metrics that bounce between two fences to make sure that they're not doing something that should be done and they're doing something that should be done. So that's where data gets useful. You can stylize it into BI tools. You can stylize it with our BI tool gives these interpretations, does this, does this. I always go to the idea, why spend money until you need to? First, find the validation of doing things like that. Use the free tools that are there. We're all held by the shorties with Google. We use their platforms. We use their data. It is the entity that we have to deal with, and we have to follow according to their guidelines and rules. Well, they also offer conveniently a Data Studio. Used to be Data Studio. Now it's called Looker Studio. It's free. And it connects directly to everything else Google, your paid campaigns, your analytics from your site, and so forth. You can take all these data points in and say, hey, I want to do an arrivals date chart. I want to know what time of days we're doing business and tracking. In order to do all that, it's just not you don't have analytics sitting on your website. You have to make sure that you identify in your booking engine as well. Hey, I want to pull these data points that I know what they went into the booking engine for and what is that they purchased and how did they purchase and so forth. So I can correlate the information I know from the website to that. Because with GA4, everything is being tracked. You just have to identify what you're interested in measuring, which is a big difference, as we've talked about many, many, many times, between GA3 or what Universal Analytics used to be, which you had to predefine it in order to measure it. And if you didn't predefine it, it wasn't measured. So doing the ability to look back and say, what are my better days? What are my better products? What are my better devices? Is it mobile versus desktop? Mobile looks, but desktop books. I should actually coin that phrase. Anyways, all of this, geography, where are they coming from? What dates are they interested in? When are they arriving versus when are they departing? When do they book those arrivals before they depart? How far ahead? What's my actual lead time? When is it that they book compared to when did they stay? What advertising channel created that for me? You begin to ask all these really cool questions. So even though we're talking about the 5 big Qs, they're really just inception points of deeper diving data as to how to answer those top 5 questions, how to really understand where your data is coming from in a way that's useful, not just here's a report and there's some really cute pictures of your porta cachet, Mr. Owner, and some really neat pictures of that little favorite project you had of the spa with people wearing cucumbers over their eyes or stones on their back. Yeah, there's some pictures in there too. And we're going to cotton candy the numbers that we want to show you that we're doing a good job, even though there's nothing to do about them, nothing relevant about why they're being done, other than the implied value that something's being better today than it was yesterday. That's my last grinding axe on that one. So there you have it. The correct way to gather data, the 5 Qs is a great inception point for it, but you really see that it's actually the tip of the iceberg as to answering those larger Q questions on deeper dives so that marketers can give you data-driven answers, not subjective, opinionated perspectives. That's what data does for you. That validates the numbers. It's a lot easier to go into a budget dialogue asking for money where you're not talking about you feel or it looks like or it seems or we're hoping or all these other words that get used. Here's my numbers. We spent this. This is what we did. These are the ways that it was contributed and produced to. So for us to do this, we need to spend this in these categories and we'll produce this number right here. And if they say, well, we can't give you that money, then don't expect that much money. Your choice. You told me you wanted this carrot this high. This is what it's going to take to get the carrot that you want to put that high. If you don't like it, don't expect it. I've had those conversations. It annoys the heck out of owners and senior management because you're pointing at numbers. You're pointing at data. They're pointing at expectations and desires and arbitrary things that they have in their backgrounds of finances and expansion and loans and everything else. And they're trying to make sure that a number magically makes everything like that work. And you're showing them, if you want that number, this is what it's going to take to get it. And that is a huge power shift from who's sitting behind the desk that you're presenting to the person that's standing in front of them doing the presentation. Yeah, it's fun when you're that person. It rocks. So there you have it. I think we have ground on this idea a little bit. I hope it was helpful in the perspective changes for you, because for anybody and everybody that is in the budgeting world for hospitality, you are going to be facing these things if you're not already. In the next couple of weeks, you're going to start getting data. You might be surprised that you don't have the data you used to have because anybody, whoever's responsible for it, didn't handle the transition from UA to GA4 correctly. It's going to create its own little stir. And I can tell you, business is good and the line is long of us fixing and repairing and helping and guiding and patching and all that other stuff, because a lot of companies did not go through the transition well. And they are faced with the reality that they're going to have gap points in their understanding of what they are going to project next year, and validating that with data that actually is in reference to it. So I hope you're not one of those people. And for those of you all that have reached out to us asking for help, we'll get to you. And in the meanwhile, I do hope everyone has a wonderful remainder of the July. For everyone in the heat, I empathize. Be safe. It's not to be tried with. For those that are dealing with other weather issues between severe storms and or bad air and all of the things associated with it, please go do the things that keep you safe. But most of all, stay happy. Wow, sounds like a TV show signing off. And good luck. We're all counting on you. Anyways, for everyone that's seeing us for the first time, thank you for having discovered us. You can follow us on wherever you found us. If it's TV, the Roku, Google, Amazon, Apple, Roku, Amazon, Apple, Samsung. I think I'm missing. Anyway, you just look for the Hospitality Channel. It's a TV station dedicated to the industry of hospitality. There is a pay gateway. We have lots of other content, trainings, how-tos, product presentations, and so forth behind that gateway. But you don't have to. You can always watch the show live every Friday, 11:30 a.m. We do simulcast again for our European friends at 11 o'clock Wednesday mornings, London EU time, and also 11 o'clock a.m. Sydney Australian time for our APAC friends. And the European one covers the Mideast as well. So all of our Dubai friends and everyone in the Mideast that watches the show, which, by the way, thank you so very much for doing so. You get to see a recasted again. For everyone watching us on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube or Twitch, thank you very much. And thank you for all of our partners for broadcasting us on your Facebook pages, your YouTube channels, for all of that. Thank you so very much for it. We do have our audio podcast that we also do. There will be after this one. It's a little bit more granular. We get into actual specific tools, how to use them. And of course, we have technique discussions related to them. We do a little news coverage as well as to current events this week that have happened. The podcast audio is a lot shorter than the show. It usually runs 15 to 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes really, which we're very concise about functionalities and tools and so forth. We're in 39 countries with that. We translate both the live show, this one, and our podcast to 11 languages, 10 other than English, so hence the 11. The 10 languages that we choose are based on our international audiences as to people that I do talk fast. I know that, and I've apologized to everyone, especially my wife, every day when it comes to the fact that I do. I get very passionate about it, and I also go on wild, crazy tangents. So the translations, I've been told, help an awful lot in that, because they can at least see the continuity in the language that's more comfortable for them to understand, rather than the delay pace of listening and translating in their head. I firsthand appreciate that from having just come back from Europe for 2.5 months, where I had little magical earbuds, which we talked about on the podcast, actually, the technology for those, that allowed me to listen and have it translated in English. Well, that latency between hearing it and then having it translated can be annoying. So I do appreciate people listening to my fast-paced conversation and being behind and understanding what I'm said by the time I've changed the topic. So that's where the translations come in. If you want to see any of the old shows, this one included now, as we're wrapping it up, you can go to our I Love Lucy rerun TV station, which is hospitalitychannel.tv. There, this and all of our shows, we've been doing this now, we're going into our 10th year next month of doing this every week, no matter where we are in the world, whether it's China, Australia, Canada, Europe, anywhere we are at, we always make sure we broadcast live at 11:30 a.m. Friday mornings, Eastern time. Our podcast has been 17 years in the making. The past 9 years have been weekly. Before that, it was monthly or whatever. But the past 9 years, now going into our 10th year as well, has been weekly in our podcast. You're more than welcome to join that as well. You can find that on, like I said, 39 platforms. Strangely enough, Amazon, Siri, for Apple and Google Assistant. All you have to do is ask them to play the Hospitality Marketing Podcast, and it'll play the latest podcast show as well. So we are all over the place. Even, like I said, on Twitch, where if you use your gaming console for media, we're on there as well. So you can watch us when we simulcast as well. So with all of the self-promoting that I've just done, I thank you again for the privilege of your time. And I look forward to talking to you all next week.